Adolf Hitler is the very personification of evil.
Hitler is the most genocidally evil dictator that there ever was.
He is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews, hundreds of thousands of Slavs, gypsies, homosexuals, and people with mental and physical disabilities.
The screams, the horror of men, women and children, piled on top of one another. Horror, scenes worse than Dante's Inferno would be enacted.
This is the story of a man so diabolical, he convinces a nation of sophisticated, civilized people to be complicit in his sickening crimes.
Planned, organised, industrial-scale destruction of a whole people. That is new. That is something horrifically new.
And how a man born like any other can turn into the most malevolent dictator the world has ever seen. As soon as the Soviets break through the German front in early 1945, the outcome of World War II is clear. The Nazi Führer, Adolf Hitler, knows defeat is inevitable. Even so, on January the 30th, the 12th anniversary of his assumption to power, he makes one last public address.
I expect every German to do his duty to the last, and that he be willing to take upon himself every sacrifice he will be asked to make.
For 10 minutes, Hitler warns his people that after the war, the European nations would not be able to withstand Bolshevism, and calls on them to rise up against the Soviets, even if it means all of Germany will come crumbling down.
He was a Samson who wanted to pull down the pillars of the temple upon him.
For the Führer, he and the German state are one. What he wants, it wants. And if he dies, it must die too. So Hitler orders his men to carry out the Nero Decree, the destruction of his country's infrastructure as a punishment for its defeat. Yet the lingering question to this day is not that this madman is losing the war, but how someone who holds such deranged views came to power in the first place. In the spring of 1889, in a small apartment in Braunau-on-the-Inn, Austria, a town near the German border, Adolf Hitler is born. The fourth of what will be 6 children for this devout Roman Catholic family, young Adolf is quickly acquainted with death as he witnesses 3 brothers and a sister die in infancy. Then there's his father, Alois.
He was someone who would come back home having had a drink and would be violent, would be abusive.
He didn't spare the rod. He thrashed Hitler, teaching him from very early on that might was right and that strength and brutality were allied to domination.
Some beatings are so bad that his mother, Clara, throws herself across her son to take the blows herself. According to her doctor, Eduard Bloch, she was above all absorbed in the care of her children. And although Adolf was not a mother's boy in the usual sense, I have never witnessed a closer attachment. In 1900, Hitler moves to Linz and enters high school, where he is introduced to a doctrine that will influence him his entire life. It will give him a sense of purpose he never had.
He had a history teacher called Leopold Puch, who was fired up with the idea of German nationalism.
Austria is part of a vast empire with ancient roots. Germany is then a newly created country dating from just 1866. Both peoples speak the same language, and a radical idea is dawning that the two should become one.
It was melding together extreme nationalism and patriotism to make a person believe in their country passionately and be part of their racial community. Hitler took that idea that the Germans should be united together in this kind of pan-German, Greater German Reich.
In 1907, at just 16 years old, Hitler leaves school for the Austrian capital, Vienna, one of Europe's greatest cities. The young Hitler is armed with a thick set of drawings, determined to train at the prestigious Academy of Arts. Over 100 candidates apply. 28 are to be chosen.
He submits drawings. These are examined, and in the notes that they left the examiners, they say, reasonable drawings, heads very poorly done, no great talent. We do not recommend admission.
Rejection is followed by deep personal loss when his mother Clara dies of cancer. Then comes a final blow. He is rejected by the Academy again.
His second rejection is the more disturbing one because this was absolute now. He had no chance of returning.
Hitler plunges into a deep depression. He makes no attempt to find a job and joins the multitude of men out of work. Finally, he ends up in a homeless hostel, an experience that will brutalize him forever.
I owe it to that period that I grew hard and am still capable of being hard.
To survive, he sells pictures of Viennese buildings, and he also becomes a close observer of politics. He is repelled but fascinated by the growing socialist movement.
He really thought, unless the right can find an antidote to this, we're going to have a communist world.
He's especially intrigued by one of their tactics.
What did influence him was the way that the socialists used violence on the streets to make sure that they got their point across.
I achieved an equal understanding of the importance of physical terror toward the individual and the masses.
Other observations start stirring in Hitler's head. Vienna in 1910 has a huge Jewish population. There are more than 175,000 Jews living in the city, and Hitler starts to loathe them.
Wherever I went, I now saw Jews, and the more I saw, the more sharply they set themselves apart in my eyes from the rest of humanity. I had ceased to be a weak-kneed cosmopolitan and became an anti-Semite.
At a mere 21 years of age, the main building blocks of the Nazis' evil ideology are coming together. Intense personal hardness, extreme nationalism, a belief in the use of violence and terror, and a loathing of Jews.
Vienna was and remained for me the hardest, though most thorough school of my life. In it, I obtained the foundations for a political view which never left me.
Then in August 1914 comes an event that will affect Hitler and all German-speaking peoples in a most horrific way: World War I. At 25, he apparently joins the cheering crowds on the first day of the war.
There's a famous photo of him in the midst of a crowd in the Odeonsplatz, grinning broadly at the announcement that war had broken out.
Smiling because he really thinks that Germany can make its bid for European power, and he wants to be part of it, and on that very day, he signs up to fight for the German army.